Welcome, everyone, and thanks for bearing with us to get a little bit of a late start today. This is a training that you've signed up for, sponsored through the Department of Energy's ESPC campaign. Today, we're going to focus on setting the stage for success. These are more of an in-depth dive on best practices for planning and procurement. And our main trainer, Chris Halpin, is with us today, and he's going to take over the slides here in just a second. We're going to do a little housekeeping first. The slides you'll see today will be provided to you, and also we'll have a recording of this training today that will be saved and shareable. So in case you have colleagues that weren't able to join today live, you'll have the ability to go back to this material for reference after today's meeting. So everyone is muted, and you can keep your camera off if you'd like. You have the ability to unmute and turn your camera on, as well as raise your hand if you have questions. The chat is the best place to enter questions so we can sort of track what's coming in and make sure that you get responses to those. And then toward the end of the webinar, we'll have should have plenty of opportunity for kind of open mic and Q&A. So this is a Zoom meeting setting, meaning that everyone is live versus a kind of a one-way webinar, and that's to encourage discussion and dialogue as we go forward. So Chris, you want to go next?
Sure. There we go.
Advance the slide if you can.
Yep. There we go. You're all good.
Yeah, so I think we covered all this. Yep, next one. So I'm Doug Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. We are an implementation and training partner with the Department of Energy for the ESPC campaign. And then, as I mentioned, Chris Halpin, who's also we're doing work with ESC in support of this effort. Chris, you want to move to the next one and
sure
talk more a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I've been in this industry, energy efficiency, mostly these days, renewables and resilience, for almost 40 years, which is hard to say out loud sometimes. And I've done both engineering, sales, marketing, both on the ESCO side and an owner's rep, and I was a global energy manager in the past. So I've sat in pretty much all seats in this industry. I had my own owner's rep firm for almost 19 years, Celtic Energy Inc. Did work all over the country. That's some of you on the phone I know from that. And I've been working as a Department of Energy project facilitator for over 20 years. I currently support this part of Department of Energy, the SCEP program, as well as the Federal Energy Management Program. And I've been involved in hundreds of these types of projects from all kinds of state, local governments, schools, higher ed, most of the three-letter agencies in the government. And I'm a mechanical engineer, registered in Nevada, used to be registered in 10, 12 states. And I'm a CEM and CMVP. So I've been at this a while. I'm hoping to share some of what I call scar tissue wisdom with everybody today. Dub, do you want to talk about the ESC?
Yeah. So yeah, just a little background if you're not familiar with the ESC. So the Energy Services Coalition is a national nonprofit organization, a public-private partnership composed of really two main categories: public sector, MUSH, the municipal, university, school, and hospital, end users, customers, facility managers, policymakers at the state and local level, and contractors, the companies that do the work. The ESPC turnkey model through companies you probably know, as well as supporting contractors, finance providers, and other stakeholders. We have local chapters. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And we have very active chapters across the country. And then the national organization really provides support to that entire network. And as we're transitioning to the next slide, that's a little bit about us. So I'm going to pull up a poll here to ask a little bit about you. And I'll launch this and we'll see the results. And so familiarity, basically a background with ESPC, if folks will spend a second or two and complete this. And then we'll share these results. And then at the end, we'll also have a follow-up poll at the end. And those results are more narrative, sort of how we can do things different or better to help you in doing your jobs better. And we won't share that with the group. We'll keep that as a good resource to help us improve the overall program. And it's been going a bit.
Okay. If I can just say one other thing about ESC while we're waiting for those results to come in. So I've been involved in ESC for, I think, 12 years or so. And it's a fantastic organization. One of the reasons I like it, when I was doing this owner's rep work full time, they provide a lot of assistance at a local level. So those of you who are mostly public entity people on the call today, you can learn an awful lot by joining and attending the local chapter meetings and getting to know the people in the network in your area. So back to you, Doug.
Great. Yeah, thanks for participating in this first poll. So looks like sort of the majority of the folks are planning on working the first project or have had some experience with a couple of projects, some with a lot and some with a little bit of experience. Most of you are project leads, which makes sense. So thanks for that. And we'll turn it back over to Chris.
Alrighty. Thanks, Doug. So today we're going to be learning primarily about getting started with an ESPC project. Really, how do you set a project up for success? And we did another webinar or training about a month ago, all about sort of high level, what is energy savings performance contracting and what are all the different components and all that. And it was a lot of information in 60 minutes. And we decided to make this one a little longer. It's 90 minutes. We're going to have a lot of time for questions at the end, which we're really looking forward to. For me, that's how messages really get transmitted and people hear them, is by asking questions and getting them answered with a crowd. Right. So we're going to talk about how you really kind of kick one of these off, how you build a team, how you plan out the project, not just, oh, I need new air conditioning or my lighting, is faulty. You need to really think about financial, contractual, as well as the technical aspects of these deals. And I like to think of it as a three-legged stool, right? If one of these don't really work, your project will probably not be successful. So the next thing is probably just about the most important thing you're going to do to one of these projects is picking the right ESCO partner, right? They're going to implement all of this stuff for you. And you need to make sure you've got somebody that you can rely on and trust and have it joke about later on. It's almost like entering a marriage, 15 to 20-year marriage. So you want to make sure you've got the right partner. And then some more information about resources, closing thoughts, and then Q&A. And if there's anything that's really pressing that comes up during it, please put it into, I guess it was the Q&A, the chat, whatever Deb told you at the beginning, and we'll get to it. Otherwise, we're going to try to keep most of the questions for the end. So anyway, so there are basically 5 phases of energy savings performance contracting, right? And this is how Department of Energy has set this up in the federal space. And it's really branched out into the MUSH market over the past 4 or 5 years. They used to be very different markets, and they're starting to become more closely aligned. So there's really these 5 phases. Planning and procurement are the 2 we're going to talk about today, because we would be on the phone for hours and hours talking about all of these. The next one is the investment grade audit, which is where your ESCO does the real detailed due diligence development of the project, co-authoring a solution with the owner, and your owner's rep, which we'll talk about, developing the contract, which is sometimes called an energy services agreement, sometimes an energy savings performance contract, sometimes an EPC. There's a lot of different names for it out there, especially in the MUSH market. That's around the time a financier joins the team. You'll put out a financial RFP and get some indicative pricing. So before you sign a deal, you're going to know exactly how much everything is going to cost you upfront, as well as over the 15, 20-year term of the loan. And then design and construction is where all the ideas that were put into the investment grade audit are now designed, built, commissioned, and measurement verification activities happen, as well as figuring out how the operations and maintenance are going to be done according to how it was apportioned in the contract. And then finally, once that is all completed and the owner accepts the project, you get into the performance period. So these projects typically take roughly a year to develop, roughly 1 to 2 years to install and commission and accept. And then it's typically a 15 to 20-year performance period, right? So there's a long tail to this, and we'll talk about that in some more detail later on. And you see at the bottom of the screen here, initiating the project and eProject Express. We're going to talk about that later. It's a fabulous tool that DOE hired Lawrence Berkeley Lab to put together. That's a free online database that allows you to track everything in your project. God, I wish I had this 20 years ago. It was so hard to track these projects over time. And we'll talk about the M&V results later on. So let's get going. So what is energy savings performance contracting? You know, there's a lot of definitions out there. DOE is sort of the first one that really coined it. They use a guaranteed savings, mainly from your operations budget. And it takes money you're already spending and reinvests it in your facilities, right? That's for me one of the biggest takeaways. It allows you to basically amortize inefficiency that you have in your buildings or your facilities, or these days, you know, fleets of cars and street lighting and all that, and done properly to sort of steal a line from an old EPA Energy Star tagline. You get the performance of a hedge fund with the risk of a T-bill, right? These things have got fabulous returns. Typically, sometimes it's, you know, a 15-year payback, but most of these are in the set of 10 to 12 simple payback. Most people go, oh my God, that's a long payback. But realistically, that's about all you get when you invest in the stock market, typically through your 401k plan or your IRA plan, you know, 8 to 12% return. And at the end of the day, this is really sophisticated design build contracting with a focus on guaranteed energy savings. We'll talk about that some more. Right. So how does it affect you financially? Right. And for me, this was the biggest thing I had to learn when I went from being just a regular energy consultant doing audits and design for projects and helping owners put them out to bid and hoping we got what we would work for us. And they had to find the money. Sometimes it took 3 to 5 years to find that money. Now with this, you can get a loan, like a tax-exempt lease purchase finance loan or something like that. And it becomes budget cost neutral. So we look at all your existing operations and maintenance budgets, your energy budgets, what you're using to kind of maintain equipment over time. You basically reduce, and these are exaggerated for presentation purposes. You typically save 20 to 35, maybe 40% in one of these deals. And you take that savings and reapportion it into the financing payments, right, over time. And you usually have a small positive increment of savings, net savings. And depending on your state, some of them have a statute that requires a net positive cash flow. Like the federal government and the DOE contract requires at least $1 per year of guaranteed cash flow, net positive cash flow. And then after the ESPC contract is done, you've got all these savings you get to keep in your budget. But what this does, it allows you to fence those expenditures that can't be zeroed out in a budget. Like if you save 30% in your electric bill by doing one of these, the budget people are going to go, oh, great job, Bob, Mary, whoever, you know, we're going to reward you by cutting your utility budget by 30% the next year. This takes that money and puts it back into your facilities. And over time, this is where the magic really shows of this vehicle. We've all been experiencing, right? Even before the pandemic, utility costs were going up, right? We had a crazy increase in natural gas costs, which has driven electricity costs higher. Now with all the floods and the fires and the storms and all of this, resilience has become an issue, and utilities are putting a ton of money into the grid. So for presentation purposes, we made this a little simpler and made it sort of an even increase. But most of you don't see an even increase in cost, right? Our costs here in the West went up by 30% in a year and a half. This allows you to take advantage of that by including escalation into your energy savings over time. And again, we don't have time to get into that in detail today, but in another webinar, we will. But you can see with this over a 15, 20-year time period, you're using those savings to pay for the retrofit measures over time. So this long-term contract is a huge, huge leveraging tool for you, right? That you really just don't get in public procurement typically, right? You usually are forced to go with low bids, low price, low this, low that, low quality. And this allows you to really plan in higher quality work all the way around. So speaking of quality or lack thereof, right? So today's facilities, and these pictures are a little bit extreme, but these are real pictures from companies that work with and others took these that show you the state of our buildings today, right? And the pandemic really shone a bright light on the importance of indoor air quality, or IAQ. And boy, especially in schools, right? Those who are on this webinar about schools, it really showed everybody that, boy, the ventilation and stuff like that in this country is pretty dismal, right? This allows you to address things like this, right? You take old buildings that aren't terribly smart, right? Most of the time clocks even that are out there, or energy management systems are basically glorified time clocks. And we're using a ton of fuel, right? There's tons of deferred maintenance. There's billions and billions of dollars of deferred maintenance out there. And we're getting increases in power outages, right? We just saw this in Houston, right? A few weeks ago. I think there's still people there with that power. It's dreadful. So it makes our buildings look like this phone, right? And I used to have this phone. It was great years ago, 15 years ago. It was a great phone, Motorola. But these days, you couldn't survive in today's business world with a phone like this. So what we like to think about is, what are the facilities of the future, right? IAQ, probably one of the most important things, right? A lot of folks do this because they have old air conditioning and heating systems just need to be replaced. You can address all of those issues with one procurement through this, right? Single procurement, multiple benefit, to take some words from Amory Lovins. So you get increase in indoor air quality, modernized, and these days electrified HVAC systems, where you're not going to have to depend on fossil fuels to do the work in your buildings. Smart lighting, right? All these light fixtures now have individual IP addresses. And building analytics, we don't have time to get into it, is basically an overlay on your control system that is really it's like how AI is to the internet, building analytics is to building automation systems. And energy efficient, renewable, and resilient facilities, right? So basically turning your buildings into the analogy of a smartphone, right? And which is what we really, really need, right? We need to have these buildings, virtually wired together and smart, so you can act in the best interest of all the people in the community. And this allows you to do this, right? And so why would you do this? And all of this was in the previous webinar, so I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. But for a lot of the reasons you would expect, you don't have a lot of cash laying around, a lot of problems with facilities, energy costs are rising. Depending on your state, you may have some pretty aggressive goals, like in California and New York and Maryland and Hawaii have really aggressive decarbonization goals. And this creates thousands and thousands of jobs. And I live in Las Vegas now. I moved from the Northeast 6 years ago. And we were running projects here at the time that created thousands of jobs, and the unemployment rate here was 20%, right? That was huge, absolutely huge. And it can do that again today. And some of the features of this is you get this investment grade audit I mentioned at the beginning, that is a detailed due diligence evaluation of your facilities, where the results are guaranteed, right? A fixed price or guaranteed maximum price I'll talk about later, and guaranteed annual savings, right? Again, you just do not get this in typical public procurement. It's virtually unheard of, right? You get a turnkey installation, right? We'll talk about that some more later on. So you hire one contractor to do virtually all of the work, as opposed to 4 to 5 procurements that it takes to do that typically. You get to mitigate risks using the risk responsibility performance matrix the Department of Energy came up with 15, 20 years ago. And that's a live link, so we don't have time to get to it today, but once you get these slides, you'll be able to go to all these links. And it really helps you identify and apportion out where the risks lie in these types of deals, right? And which is you, the owner, and which is the ESCO, right? And so we'll talk about that some more a little bit later. And open book pricing, one of the best things about this, and one that uses best practices, your contractor is going to show you what all their subcontractor costs are, and how much are they charging, we'll get into this in the procurement later, for engineering, for project management, for markups, overhead, profit, all of that, all transparent and reasonable. So you get to see what you're actually paying for in detail, and you can negotiate back and forth. It's one of the beauties of this. There's no like open the sealed bids and you're kind of stuck with the low number, right? Here you get to negotiate to get what you want. So I already talked about reallocating current spending. And as you'd imagine, most of this these days is getting implemented in buildings, with some in streetlights and EV fleet transformations. But all these technologies going into buildings are really the key to what goes on here. And even non-energy facility enhancements. I saw entities where they put in trash compactors, going from liquid soap to foam soap. I mean, things like that. It's amazing what you can do with one of these. So how do you really get started? So this is a 12-step program, right? where you first want to contact your state energy office. And some of you on this are at your state energy office. So you're living with this every day already, most likely. If you're not with the state energy office, contact them. A lot of them have resources available with technical assistance. And we went over this in a lot more detail in training one. So feel free to go back and get a copy of that. And if you're a small town or county or school district, feel free to contact your larger neighbors. I know a county in Hamilton, Ohio did this a few years ago, which is the county around Cincinnati. And we're able to help 3 or 4 small towns who on their own could never really pull one of these off. They need to be at least $1 million to $5 million to really kind of get ESCOs out there. And it's more into the multi-million-dollar range these days because of what's going on in the energy market due to the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to talk about identifying a project champion inside your organization to really lead this effort. You need somebody that is what we all call, right, the cat herder. You've heard this term before. Hiring an owner's rep is going to be the first decision you make if you're interested, and making sure you're going to have a successful project. And we're going to do a whole training just on this. Assembling and educating your internal team, absolutely key. That's what turns this from what we call build design into design build. Make sure everybody's educated. They know what they're buying from the marketplace before a single procurement goes out on the street. Then identifying project goals and objectives. What do you have to reduce energy by 30% by a certain date? Are you trying to create jobs? You're trying to just replace old equipment? We'll talk about all that. Establishing communication protocols and engaging the community, right? And all of you have to do this every day as it is. I know probably everybody on this webinar does at least 5 jobs. That's what I've found that's out there. And it's not easy. I know that. But making sure clear communication early and often is a key to success with this. Developing a high-level pre-qual study. We call this pre-qual assessments. Instead of having an ESCO come out and do a free audit for you, which doesn't always make a lot of sense, once you get your OR on board, your owner's rep on board, they can do one for you to see sort of, is there any there before you go through a whole long process of getting procurement people, legal, finance, all that involved. That understanding the process for each phase, securing the commitment from financial and legal departments, absolutely key. You want to make sure the people who hold the contractual strings and the financial strings are on board from the very, very beginning. Otherwise, this is going to go nowhere. And I've seen folks do this. They go 9 months down the road and then, legal doesn't agree with this, and it stops dead. They spend a lot of time and money. And then selecting your ESCO partner. That, again, is sort of the culmination of this webinar. So first thing, building your team. So your project champion, usually it's a person inside your organization, because there's only so much somebody can do. Like I used to do full-time from the outside as an owner's rep. You're not inside. You don't know the policies. You don't know the people. You don't know how to get to the right people. You don't know the gatekeepers, right? A project champion does this. They drive the progress. They build and keep momentum going, build support and keep momentum throughout one of these projects and how they get developed. And these aren't that easy, right? It's a complex process, but it is worth it. Once you put all the effort into the beginning, and getting somebody at the beginning who can do this for you is absolutely key to success. And I know that some of you on this webinar who are in states that I worked for in the past, and it was a real difference where you could see people who were into this and were able to get all the ducks in a row, really made for successful projects. And you're going to work closely with the owner's rep, and you understand all the internal processes, policies, fiscal years, or, July 1, right? That alone can affect a project, right? So again, we'll talk about this some more in a follow-up. So what does an OR really do for you, right? And again, we're going to do a whole presentation on this in a couple of months, but it really helps you derive long-term value. Again, when I was doing this as an ESCO in the 90s, boy, I wish there was those kinds of folks out there, because we had deals we worked on for 2 years, and ultimately they just never got approved, right? Because the owner didn't really understand what they were buying, and they were too risk averse. They were worried, as they should be, that you're going to sign a $10 or $20 million deal. You want to make sure you're going to get what you're paying for, right? So ORs help you do that, and they can really help you educate everybody on your team, like doing what we're doing today over the course of a day, a half a day or a day, right? And multiple iterations of it. And again, all of this is self-explanatory. There's great resources out there. The ESPC NRC. That's run by Department of Energy and a bunch of stakeholders, including the ESCO and owner rep communities, is a huge resource. And DOE developed this training certificate series. I helped with it, and some others out there helped putting this together. And these are live links. Again, you can go in this training certificate series. This is 8 modules of like in-depth knowledge of either for owners reps or folks like you who want to run a project. You can learn an awful lot through this, right? And here's a white paper I wrote for DOE 6-7 years ago about the benefits of using an owner's rep. So how do you use owner's reps, right? So it's best to hire them as early as possible. Like I said, as soon as you're thinking about doing a project, get an RFP out there to hire one. And we'll talk about how to do that later on. They need to be independent. I can't stress this more. If you're going to hire a company or a person who's like mainly doing work for ESCOs, that can create a conflict of interest. I've lived that one, and it's not good, right? You want somebody who's working for you and only you to help you through this project. You can get a list of them through the this ESC Campaign's website at that link. DOE also has a list of project facilitators. That's what the federal market calls owners reps. This PF list, you can click on this. It goes to a list like 50. More than half of them are federal employees, right? Because they're mainly aimed at the federal market. The other half are folks like me and others who are out there either on their own or work for firms that do project facilitation and owners reps in the mush market. So if you're going to contact folks on that list, you want to make sure they do this in the mush market as well. DOE, actually, I'm helping put these template procurement and contract docs together. They're going to be done in the next couple of months. And when you hire an owner's rep, you're typically paid fee for service, right? They're typically engineers or engineering firms. And you usually pay it sort of out of a utilities budget, project management budget, whatever budget you use until the financing gets in place. And then you can reimburse yourself for whatever you've spent already and then what you're going to spend going forward to have that owner's rep on board. And one of the recommendations I'm telling people that's out there, the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there's a lot of money. I mean, tens of millions of dollars out there through the Energy Efficiency Community Block Grant Program, where you can use those funds to pay for an owner's rep and bond counsel and a bunch of things like that. So please use those. Okay, so putting together your team, right? The first step, like I said, is getting your project champion inside, help them get going on the project, identifying what the scope is, what the needs are, and all that kind of stuff. Like I said a few minutes ago, getting legal on board from the beginning is absolutely key. They're going to help you take, standardized documents that you can get from Department of Energy or your state energy office and customize them to meet your particular needs, right? They're going to review everything that before you sign any documents. Same thing with finance. They're the only ones that can encumber you financially, especially most of you on the phone are either public or nonprofits, right? That there's an art and science to doing that. And these people need to be on board from the beginning because they're going to be taking money out of one budget, putting it into another budget line item, right? And procurement, again, once you have a good idea, this is what we want to do, you want to talk to your procurement folks and make sure it can meet your current state statutes, your local town charter, even I've seen come up, and to make sure you're getting a competitive procurement. And typically you can, do pre-qualification, like those of you that are with states, a lot of state agencies do pre-qual program for ESCOs. And then you have, 5 to 10 ESCOs on board, and agencies and local governments can pick from them, or they can do a follow-up RFP to down select, right? But procurement is absolutely key to this. Operations and maintenance, right? This is one of the ones that often gets overlooked in most new building designs and retrofits and rehabs. Most of the design community and the construction community sort of overlook all the folks that keep those buildings running day in and day out. And I come from a family of laborers and tradesmen, and they know that they often get overlooked. And I can't stress more how you need to get these folks involved, right? They're the men and women that keep these buildings running and know more about these buildings than anyone ever will, right? You want to get them on board at the beginning. Same with the construction folks. These are the folks who are going to be actually running this for you. Your own internal project manager need to be involved from the beginning so they know what expectations are. And then oversight, we talked about already with getting your owner's rep and approving authorities, right? again, this is something I've learned the hard way with like universities in certain states. There's a series of 3 in a row approvals that you need to get. And if you miss one, you kind of have to go back to the end of the line, right? So you need to know who the AHJs are, authorities having jurisdiction. So stakeholder engagement, again, this is something it's taken a long time for the engineering community to really get good at. It's getting better now. But with performance contracting, because it's a different way of doing things, it's really important to engage with everybody that's involved in this from the beginning. The building occupants, if it's, a school, the management as well as faculty, you can integrate, a lot of sustainability knowledge into one of the, even how to run businesses and so on. So there's a lot of great opportunities in community engagement and knowing who to involve, why, when, and how. Right, that is key. Again, we could spend hours talking just about this, but ESPC, champions, DOE has an ESPC champions toolkit. That this live link here, you can spend a lot of time going through this when you have some extra time. But this is absolutely key to success. And communication protocols, right? I talked about this before. Establish clear protocols early on. You need to know who is on your team. There's always going to be naysayers. That needs to be addressed. There's going to be people on the fence. That needs to be addressed. And you need to know how long it's going to take to get everybody on board, right? This takes a lot of talking, emails, back and forth, some pretty candid conversations in many cases, because this is so different. A lot of procurement folks, for instance, are really just used to, we put out a bid for the engineer, we put out a bid for the contractor, we do the commissioning agent, we do the lead consultant, we do all these different things. Now you're kind of rolling a lot of that up into one procurement, right? So it takes some time. And a lot of this is self-explanatory. One of the things that an owner's rep can really do to help you with this is keeping a communications log, so that as submissions come in from an ESCO, say, and you and they are going to review those submissions, you keep this all in a spreadsheet, right? And Department of Energy, we can add this, or when we send that out to you, has a comment response resolution log that I used to use in all my federal projects. That is perfect for this sort of thing, right? We use this in the mush market all the time. And another sort of lesson learned here, if you have an OR, make sure they're involved in every meeting, call, and email exchange, right? To make sure that they are only going to be able to help you if they are in complete, they have complete knowledge of what's going on with the project. So establishing roles and responsibilities, got another one that I learned the hard way years ago, getting everybody to understand in detail what the roles and responsibilities are, right? Because this is absolutely key to that, that circular graphic I showed you before. Everybody on that cycle needs to know what they're going to be doing from the very, very beginning, right? And determining who drives the schedule, right? That is absolutely key. It's usually the project champion, but once you get an ESCO on board, it tends to be the ESCO driving the schedule, and then when they can get into rooms and this and that. So there's a lot of this sort of that needs to be worked out. And defining and managing expectations is one of the single biggest keys to success through this, right? People need to understand how this is design build. It's not regular design bid build, right? For example, there's a lot of things like that that need to be explained from the beginning, what you can get and what you can't get out of this, right? And again, we'll do a follow-up on this later on. So getting down to planning the project, right? You want to put together your project goals and customize them to advance your mission, right? Mission is always first, right? Again, I'm an energy consultant, been doing this for years. Mission first, teaching children, healing the sick, running state agencies, departments of correction, all of that. That is way more important than any of this, right? This is nice, but this can help you advance that mission by making it easier to do that, cutting costs so you can spend that money elsewhere, right? Fixing issues and problems and hot and cold calls and all this kind of stuff that tend to drive folks crazy that are in facilities. You want to get all that stuff communicated out internally and to the ESCO community once you get going on one of these projects, right? Whether that's energy savings goals, cost savings goals, creating jobs, that kind of thing. Or in these days, resilience, right? We're starting to see a lot of this in states that are really be affected by climate change today. There's a lot going on in that space using this tool. So the different components of this, right? So there's identifying affected buildings, facilities, and equipment you want to have involved in this project. There are some things that are often sacred, no touching the IT stuff, right? That tends to be sacred. But boy, virtually everything else is game that either uses energy or is energy related. And I mentioned earlier having your OR do a high-level pre-qualification assessment. So to give you an idea of, okay, you have 10 buildings, you spend about $2 million a year in utilities. We think you come up with about a $10 million project that'll save you X dollars per year. And here's, 5 or 10 different, what we call energy conservation measures, ECMs, that we think would work for you. So that's something you can then hash out internally to see if this the kind of thing that makes sense for you, right? And it creates a sort of a straw man, if you will, of what a project might look like. But then it sort of goes in the background, and you don't want to release the details of that to the ESCOs, right? Because they're going to come up with their own ideas. It helps you start to think about risk and responsibility allocation, how you're going to get folks trained. And again, ESPC is the single best way that I've seen in public construction to get staff trained, right? And we'll talk about that in another webinar. Measuring and verifying actual savings, right? Again, you never get that. I've seen brand new buildings, LEED silver buildings and LEED gold buildings that just don't work, right? There's no skin in the game for the contractors. And then operation and maintenance, repair and replacement, and training, right? These are all big components of this. We'll go into another webinars. I already talked about it, knowing who's going to approve these projects, but how are they going to get approved? How does this work, right? You need to build that into sort of life cycle of the project, right? And you need to know when to get informing people, when to get feedback, reviews, approvals. Again, there's another thing. I can't overstress this because it's a different way of getting things done. It works really, really well. It's been out for 50 years. One of the keys that I've seen to this is making sure both internal stakeholders who are involved understand this and are on board with it, but external stakeholders, right? You need to make sure whether you have school boards or city council, state construction offices. We've seen this in multiple states that I've worked in. If they don't give you the go ahead, none of this is getting done. And fire marshal, right? If you're going to do retrofit whole buildings, doing a deep retrofit, the fire marshal needs to be involved, right? So there's a lot of things like this that need to get done, but you need to know what the process is. Then financial, I think we're going to do a whole presentation on financial considerations, but this is again early on. What are your local and state funding options? Is there ECBG money that I mentioned a few minutes ago? Do you have capital? If you're going to replace a chiller plant in a building, you maybe have 300,000, it's going to cost $1 million to really do it right. That's where you can take that 300,000 and put it as sort of like a down payment on a deal like this. Are your ESCOs that you're looking at credit worthy, right? What allowable contract term do you have? Many states have this in legislation, the maximum limit for a contract term. So you need to understand that. We talked about incentives. There's tons of utility incentives in almost every state as it is. And then there's federal and state incentives as well. And debt ceiling, right? That's become a big, big issue. Ever since the economic downturn, 12 years ago, public agencies have never really recovered from that. And there's been a lot of building going on in the meantime. So debt ceilings are an issue that need to be dealt with in this. And we'll talk about that in another session. So in the legal front, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can get all these documents through DOE. We'll have a link in a later presentation about this. There's typically your owner's rep, getting an agreement with them, an RFP or an RFQ. We'll explain the difference in a minute. And if you're at a state that already has these done and you can just use them, that's great. It's a lot less work than the actual project RFP, the investment grade audit agreement, the ESCO's base contract, if it's a master contract, the final agreement you have with the ESCO, it's sometimes an energy services agreement, sometimes a performance contract, a lot of different names, and then a financing solicitation. And again, I won't read through all of these, but this is how you use those contracts to help you document and create where the risk is apportioned and where things are going to be spent and how things are going to be managed. And again, this isn't just design construction and then hope the building works, right? It's a design construction and 15, 20 years of skin in the game for an ESCO, right? It's a huge difference. And it needs to be reflected properly in the contract documents. So as I've mentioned multiple times now, these are different than traditional construction projects. Some of the things that really make it unique, these performance guarantees. So if your contractor tells you this chiller plant is going to have a certain efficiency that gets measured during the term of the contract, right? And if it's not meeting those guarantees, they need to fix it, right? There's make whole clauses in all of these contracts, so that if there's a savings shortfall, they're writing you a check, right? And we don't have time to get into the details of that today, but that's one of the keys for me. It's a firm fixed price or guaranteed maximum price. There's basically no change orders in performance contracting, because the ESCO is developing a scope, and they're putting, their money down, saying this is going to be, say, a $10 million project. If they forgot to count the lights in a wing of your school, that's on them, right? They need to put those lights in at their cost, right? It's again one of the beautiful things about this, and assigning O&M and R&R, what we call repair and replacement responsibilities in the federal market. And ESCO does this for, say, any branch of the military or Department of Energy itself. That ESCO is responsible for all of the operations and maintenance repair responsibility, right? It's a huge responsibility. In the MUSH market, it tends to be split, but that's something it's unique and different and needs to be put in plain English into contracts. And you need to understand the risks, and we'll talk about that in a minute, so you can mitigate them, right? There are different risks here than there are in normal public procurement. I think there's a lot less risk, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's organization and customer risks. So what are the risks to you, right? Okay, maybe the savings don't get realized, right? And that's where the savings shortfall comes in. But what if it's something that, because your folks didn't maintain the equipment properly, right? That all needs to be included in the contract. That when projects of the 1 or 2% of these that fail, it's usually because of measurement verification or maintenance issues, right? If you're going to have a major change in your facility, like we saw during the pandemic, right, or buildings literally being mothballed, that can affect your contract. And changing leadership. Again, I've lived this one. The new prison warden comes in, oh, yeah, whatever. That was the old person's deal. I'm not interested in it anymore, right? And the ESCOs have risks, right? They take a lot of risk in one of these. That properly done, like 90% of the risk in these types of deals are put on the ESCO, right? And like I mentioned already, there's no change orders. They have to front a lot of the money to get this done, right? There's a lot of development cost in this that they don't get paid till the contract is signed, right? So there's a lot of risk in this for a contractor. And they've got to guarantee these savings like I talked about. The same thing if there's a delay in this, they've typically have a bridge loan to get them through most of the construction. They have to, pay all the local contractors. They tend to be GCs that are highly specialized, but they're hiring a lot of local mechanical electrical contractors that you already use, and you typically recommend to them at the very beginning, right? So that everybody in this deal has incentive to make sure the project gets done on time. So now you've been through the beginning of this project, right? Now you have your OR in place, your team's assembled. Hopefully everybody's trained up. No one will ever have complete knowledge of the whole thing, right? Everyone comes from different backgrounds, but everybody at least is within a band of knowledge of how this is going to go. You've got all your approvals, right? The 3 legs of the stool determined. You've figured out how and when to get the money, and everybody, right? Like I mentioned earlier, everybody's been briefed on this internally and externally. Now's the most important decision you're going to make is hiring an ESCO. Like I mentioned, they're going to be providing virtually what you would typically take 4 procurements to do. You're going to do it in 1. So this is sort of the 5 phases of this piece of it: determining the scope of work, collecting information, and this is not a detailed scope of work. We'll talk about that. Putting out the RFP or RFQ, evaluating it, and making your selection. Right. So from a high level, when you put one of these RFPs or RFQs out, right, an RFQ tends to be for developing a list of pre-qualified ESCOs. Sometimes RFPs are put out right at the beginning. They're typically used for selecting an ESCO for an individual project, but I've seen them used in multiple different ways, right? I've seen them in using terms that don't even look like this, right? But RFP typically includes financial information. That's where you're going to be asking for markups and fees and that kind of thing, right? Just indicative pricing. So you want to make sure they have sort of background and some information. You're not going to give them like piles of energy bills at the very beginning of this to just select somebody, but give them an idea of, we have 50 buildings, we have 100 buildings, we use $1 million a year, 20 million a year, and utilities and O&M. That gives an ESCO, because it may have small regional ESCOs that go, oh, that's too big for me, or something that may be too small for a big national or international player, right? So it's good to get a lot of information out to them at the beginning in a summary fashion. All right, so here's how we do this. And again, I'm not going to read every single one of these, but this is good for after the fact. let everybody know what your goals are. Include these existing conditions. This pre-qualifications report the OR will do for you will be like very high level paragraph each sort of here are the buildings, here how old they are, how much energy they use, where you spend the money, and so on. And then their sort of guesstimate of, we think you should be able to replace this equipment and do these sort of projects with these sort of economics, right? You don't want to put any of this economics into an RFP that's going out to the market, right? That's for your internal purposes only, right? And even if they've developed sort of a high level set of ideas, you don't want to say to the ESCOs, we want this done with the lighting, this done with the air conditioning, da 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 da. Tell them, hey, we want better lighting and air conditioning. We want to be able to get more EVs, right? But you let the ESCOs, which are typically very creative and very innovative, use that to your benefit, right? They're really going to be partners of yours for the long term. You can work together to meet your goals that way. So again, I'm not going to read through all of these. I've talked about this. A lot of it is, get experience and qualifications on similar projects. If you're with a school district, K through 12 school district in a rural county somewhere, you don't want to hear about what we did for, New York City, right? Or something like that, right? You want to have complementary backgrounds and histories and how have they worked, and make sure you want to know who's going to be on your team. I've seen this before where people send in the closers from out of town that are great talkers, but they're not actually going to be working on the project, right? And getting references like you normally do. There's things illegal you need to do, abiding by Dodd-Frank. We talked about creditworthiness. You also want to make sure you're thinking about leading edge technologies. Most public entities are not in the business of doing bleeding edge technologies. Tech companies sort of focus that in that and get those technologies demonstrated, right? One of the most important things of all of this is establish a timeline and stick to it, right? That really increases your credibility in the marketplace, right? Because ESCOs are going to want to be a partner with your agency or your school district or municipality if they know you're serious about this. And again, I can't stress that more. That is key to success in this, right? And eProject Express, we're going to talk about later. I mentioned it a few minutes ago. So the first step when you actually get this out on the street, put together a pre-proposal call and high level, discuss your objectives and goals. Here's the RFP, RFQ, any questions, sort of high level, any procurement oriented questions. You don't want to be answering live in a phone call, detailed questions from the ESCO community, right? If there's actual questions, ask for them all in writing, respond in writing, right? Use your OR to help you answer the questions and get them back in a timely manner. That's why it's really critical to fix a schedule early on, knowing you want to build in time for getting questions out there and answering them. And please give all the ESCOs at least a couple of weeks to finalize their proposals after those answers are provided. Right? I've seen this before where you're like, oh, questions are due, answers get back to them on the 25th, proposals due on the 28th. It doesn't give an ESCO enough time to reflect on the answer they've gotten and get that into a proposal out to you. And a lot of times ESCOs may want to go do site tours, but I've done this from experience. Taking 25 people around buildings, buses, and all this is a nightmare to manage. And then you may have people who get more information out of the facilities guide. Somebody else didn't hear it, and that's kind of a mess. So I just recommend don't do that. It's much easier to just give it a high level when you select your ESCO. Then they're going to be spending a lot of time in those buildings, right? Also, no going around the procurement people, right? They're the lead. We don't want people, because a lot of these companies already work for you, whether they provide you with air conditioning or controls or whatever, and already have existing relationships. You want to try to keep that with the procurement person. And these are typically 60 to 90 days long. And please, I still see RFPs with send, an original and 5 copies by mail or drop it here. That's, save a forest. That's what we're all trying to do. So now the RFP is out, RFQ is out. You've got your proposals. Luckily, right? DOE has a whole evaluation workbook. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can go to this link and there's a whole best practices for selecting an ESCO, right? There's a lot of great information in there. It's a lot of stuff that you would expect that makes sense and is self-explanatory. So some of the stuff that I've seen over time, again, work with the state energy office, right? If you have folks there who are running these and you're a local school district or whatever, you're an agency, work with them. They can really help you with this. Make sure everybody is on board with the evaluation of the ESCO's capabilities and innovativeness. You don't want stuff that's too far out there or people that are just too conservative, right? You want something that's going to be in the middle. You want to make sure you get templates that are out there, so you can get apples to apples comparison. Do a detailed review of the proposals. Most of you don't have the time to do this. That's one of the reasons why you want an owner's rep. They can do a detailed review, provide you with sort of a cliff notes or even, multi-tab spreadsheet with evaluations of the proposals. Make sure you understand the markups and indicative pricing. We'll talk about some more later. And I recommend, having lived through hundreds of these, is say you get 8 or 10 proposals, shortlist them down to 3 or 4, and interview every single one of those firms. Now they're sort of past the pandemic. Doing it in person is key, right? You want to make sure you want to look the people in the eye that are going to be working for you and installing millions of dollars of stuff in your buildings. Getting trust and rapport built early almost guarantees success in one of these folks, in one of these projects, using local folks especially. Check references like you would normally do, and debrief the losers, right? Make sure you reach out, offer a half hour to an hour of talking to them about why they weren't selected, right? It helps them do a better job next time. And again, it helps you in the marketplace. You're a credible player then in this, and this business is growing. So you want to make sure that gets done. And like I mentioned jokingly earlier, right, the comfort factor is key. You could have a 20-year relationship with this company, and most of the people involved on both sides most likely be gone in that time. But it really is, a co-authored solutions to a lot of these things. So that's key, right? So there's a lot of resources that are out there, right? There's podcasts that the ESC puts out. This toolkit, ESPC toolkit, the Department of Energy has. Performance contracting resource center that I mentioned has more resources beyond that training certificate series I talked about. There's a financing navigator that I just learned about recently that's really helpful. And eProject Express, we're going to talk about again in a minute. Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a lot of you probably know about this. This has been out for 20 years, where it basically rates your buildings using a score of 0 to 100. 75 and above is sort of a good score. And using performance contracting can help you get virtually all your buildings into the Energy Star award category. And then DOE also has a funding and incentive, a resource hub. This is really, really amazing. And then the financing navigator, that's already up there. So,
Chris, real quick on that slide before. So those are in the deck that you'll get. These will be links, I believe, right? Embedded links.
Yep, these are live links.
Those and take you right to those resources. Thanks.
Yep. Sorry, we didn't change the color in it like we usually do, but anyway, yeah. So these are great things to consult. So again, I know I tend to talk fast, and I apologize, but I wanted to make sure we didn't run out of time and gave you plenty of time for questions. So I know this has been a lot of info, right? You're drinking from a fire hose. And again, I apologize for that, but there's a lot of content here. And I usually, again, when I was doing this as a full-time consultant, I would spend a day, right, talking about everything we just did in 45 to 50 minutes. So ESPC has been around, like I said, for like 50 years, right? This is actually started in Ohio and Washington State in the mush market originally in like 1980, 82. And it's a tried and true process, right? $7 billion a year gets invested in this, and is growing more and more every year, especially with what's going on with increased prices. All these federal subsidies are coming down. It's big, right? and getting bigger. There's these national model instruments out there now. Again, we're going to talk about that and follow on trainings, but you can get those from this PCNRC. And there's a lot of expert providers out there, right? We're starting to see a lot more outside attorneys who have experience with this. Before, you have like a bond counsel, say, and they had no idea about performance contracting. And now there's legal firms who like national, international practices. They have groups who specialize just in this: performance contracting, solar PPAs, resilience, that kind of thing. It's absolutely key. Same thing with financial. A lot of financial advisors never knew about this previously either. Now a lot of them are starting to get more and more knowledgeable about performance contracting. And of course, third-party owners reps, you go on to the supporters link that I showed you before, the PF list. There's a couple of dozen really in the country that are worth their salt. But it's getting more and more, which is great. And we need more and more people like that out there. It's sort of like where commissioning agents were 20, 25 years ago. at the beginning, when people are like, "Oh, we can't afford that," and now you wouldn't think of building a new building with hiring a commissioning agent, typically, right? It's just part of the process. And of course, sticking with this ESPC campaign, right? That we're trying really hard to provide you all with trainings that are, exclusive to just public and nonprofits, webinars that are going to be open to everybody, peer-to-peer exchanges. We're going to start having them in the next month or two. We can get on a call like this, a meeting like this with your 5 or 6 of your peers and talk about what's worked for you and what hasn't worked for you. And DOE can provide limited technical assistance, direct technical assistance. We're going to have these office hours I'll talk about in a second. But anyway, that for me, I think it's, having been in this business almost 40 years, I started doing this for schools and municipalities and hospitals in 1985. And this is the best tool in the toolbox that any public entity has there that I have seen. I probably already talked about all of this, but saving money is a benefit, meeting your environmental goals, creating jobs, resiliency, which this is, for me, again, the single best tool out there to achieve resiliency, and deferring maintenance, reducing that backlog. That is a huge burden on public entities, billions and billions of dollars. And for me, a lot of you, you have kids, you have grandkids, having healthier environments for those folks to be living and learning and healing in is another huge benefit to this, and reaching targets, whatever they are. So with that, we'll close up. If you haven't done so, please join the campaign. I know Laura Carpenter, who's running this and doing a masterful job of it, is on vacation this week. And Daniel is helping her, doing a great job. And Dub and I and others at ESC are more than happy to help as we get forward. And, get going on one of these. There's still a lot to learn, but we're here to help. So, Dub, you want to talk about the trainings, or Daniel?
Yeah, I'll start, and Daniel, you can chime in as well. Daniel is on the DOE team and works with Laura, and he's on today. So different trainings are upcoming. The next one, August 15th, is you heard Chris allude to eProject Express. This is really a great tool that was designed with states and local governments in mind. There is a tool that is I guess, more robust, that is a feature of the federal ESPC program, where project performance information and data is captured in sort of a common format. It's a little too much in many cases for state and local programs, and so EPX, eProject Express, was designed specifically for state and local governments as a tool to capture project performance information and to really institutionalize that. One of the slides Chris showed mentioned that, it's not uncommon for an ESPC to have a term of 20 years or so. How many of the people who were there at the initiation of that project are there 20 years later? Probably not many, if any. So by using a system like EPX to record performance information, it provides that bridge from key stakeholder to key stakeholder within the organization. So that's a great tool that's coming up on August 15th. Other webinars that are planned, we have a case study in Texas. The Texas Facilities Commission, which is effectively the GSA of Texas, has done 6 phases of ESPC on a number of buildings they own and operate. That will get on the calendar this fall. There's also a planned webinar on ESPC in higher education. I believe that Ole Miss, or the University of Mississippi, that has done a project there, is going to be talking about their experience. So those are some things that are on the immediate horizon, and through the campaign newsletter, we'll be announcing more information. Daniel, anything to add there? Oh, thank you. He has just popped up in the chat the August 15th EPX registration link. So I encourage folks to share that, to sign up if you haven't done so already. And the other thing is at the bottom, so office hours request. Chris mentioned as part of the support toolkit for the ESPC campaign, we'll be providing office hours, sort of individual technical support, and the way to access that is through this tool. So when you get the slide deck, that'll be a link there, and that way you can access sort of a deeper level of individualized sort of technical assistance.
Yeah, and Dub, thanks so much for that. And this office hours, I think, is a great feature of this ESPC campaign, right? We won't be able to like solve all your problems, but we can certainly, spend an hour or two on the phone if you have particular issues and like a project you're starting to develop, or you've had one and you're having issues with it or whatever. And we can help at least point you in the right direction, right? And that's what I'm hoping out of all of this, is that you go to these trainings, learn more about this, start to get more comfortable with this as a program and a process for you. Because like I said, done well, this is the best thing I've ever seen to get work done in public buildings. And we're going to do everything we can, within a reasonable time allocation to help you out. So we're really looking forward to that. All right, I think questions.